Displacement geometry is a type of geometry that we obviously haven't used yet, but you'll probably want to use as you create more interesting levels. So let's just get our prefab little world here. Oasis prefabs, simple room. Plop that guy in there. And zoom around. So we got a guy standing here inside our developer textured level. It's on group. Selection tool. And now we can select our floor separately. And let's give him something more interesting to walk on than just this plane, this flat, concrete looking developer surface. So Shift A to bring up your face edit sheet. And so far we've focused on the material tab where we can actually apply different materials, different textures to our geometry. So we could change our floor from this developer texture to something more interesting. Let's choose a dirt or a grass or anything really you're looking for. But when you type dirt in the filter, one of the first dirt textures that come up is actually these blend textures, these blend dirt cliff, blend dirt grass. Let's choose 001A of blend dirt grass. We'll talk about what the blend portion of the texture, the material, does in a minute. And it has to do with displacement. So switch in your face edit sheet to the displacement tab. Let's take a look at this powerful tool inside of Hammer. With the face edit sheet open, as we know, we can select individual faces. This is important because as we're creating displacement geometry, the number of faces we have selected when we create the geometry is going to matter. So select just the new floor blend grass dirt texture that we have. And you'll see in the displacement tab you have several options. We can create, destroy, sew, invert. We have some different attributes. The first step to creating a displacement is to simply create that displacement. So you can select a single face, multiple faces, and we can create displacement. So let's go ahead and simply select our floor and hit create. Now the first thing it does is ask you what power of displacement you want to create. And we can type in values ranging from 2 to 4. And this is the power, or basically the amount of displacement you'll be able to give to your floor, 4 being the highest value. So let's just stick to our standard 3. And you'll see it instantly divides our level into this grid pattern. Whoops. If we changed our displacement power and applied that, it would divide it further. It'd subdivide those triangles. And if we went down to 2, we have very broad triangles which we can use. So 3 is generally a good number. And the next step to create your displacements is to paint the geometry. Now when we click the Paint Geometry button, we get a secondary dialog box which allows us a certain number of effects and parameters for those effects. So we can raise or lower our geometry, we can raise it to a certain height, or we can smooth geometry once we actually have some things adjusted. And you can do that either spatially, which as you hover over the grid you'll see this green circle that has to do with how big your brush that you're painting with is. We can, in the spatial radius box, drag that way up and see how that box, or how that circle grows, the green circle. We can also choose the amount that we're going to affect in our effect box. So let's bring this guy down to something a medium-sized, 25 or so. Distance we'll leave at 5. We're going to raise lower spatially. If we were to uncheck spatial, you'll see that our green circle goes away and we just get a box that's going to adjust only individual points that we get to there. So there's no fall off, there's no gradient to our lifting. So click spatial to get our little ball back, and left click on your points to start raising, or right clicking to lower these points. And you'll see, you don't want to do anything too extreme, hit Z in our 3D view and move around. You'll see from a ground view we already kind of have a little hole in our ground, a little bit of a divot in the floor. If we were to uncheck spatial, simply lowers that one given point. Generally we're going to use a spatial function as we're adjusting our geometry. You can also choose the axis on which you're moving, or you're adjusting your displacements. So face normal, the default, is basically looking straight down at the object, you can see the arrow within our spatial radius shows the direction we're going to move or we're going to adjust by left or right clicking. We change our axis, say to the x-axis. It's kind of a little more tricky to see, but you can tell that's suddenly pointing left or right, or pointing right along the floor. And if I change to y, it's coming straight at me. So if I were to left or right click, it doesn't really make any real geometry, it just moves those points one direction or another. So we'll go back to either normal or a z-axis, which if you look at that yellow arrow is pointing us straight up. And we continue to raise and lower some geometry. So maybe in the corners of our little world here, we want to raise those up, kind of like a sloped edges to our level. Really useful if you're obviously creating cliffs or caves or beaches, things that are naturally going to be not flat. And you don't want to get too crazy. Remember that 45 degrees is the maximum that our guy can climb, so this is going to be, he's going to run right into it. You can also actually mistakenly create areas which the player can climb by creating some odd displacements, which are going to allow him maybe to get to some areas that he shouldn't. So just kind of move a few more points, and let's go through some of the other displacement tools that we have available to us. You'll notice you can destroy geometry once you've created it. Brings it right back to where it was. Just undo that. A very important thing to note about displacements is that they do not block visibility, or they will not seal a map. So it may look like a solid object when we're looking at it within our room here. We can stand on it, we're going to walk over it, down the bumps, up the bumps. But if we go underneath our map, you'll notice you can see straight through it. It doesn't actually exist on the other side. And as far as the game is concerned, this is an open space, so we're going to have an obviously very big leak. Now, we could click to destroy our displacement, bring it back to its normal brush, and then we'll return to having our bottom solid object sealing our level. You can also select multiple faces of the brush to create displacements from. So let's select the side, control-click the bottom, create, power of 3. Now we have 2 displacement surfaces, which we can adjust by painting the geometry. Undo. And if you look from the top now, it no longer exists. So only the face of which you apply or create the displacement is a renderable area within Hammer. And if we simply select the bottom of our displacement, click destroy, it doesn't actually come back to our solid brush. And that's because we still have one displacement surface that we created within this brush. So if we were to click this last displacement of that brush and destroy it, suddenly there's no displacements on this brush, and we get our solid leak sealing brush right back. So just go back. What we'll do is we'll duplicate our floor, zoom in, and just drag him right up. And another thing to note about displacement geometry, if we make sure we click just the top face, displacement, create, is that displacement geometry can intersect with other world geometry. Lots and lots and lots of overlaps are going to cause some slowdown, but generally it's not enough to really matter to us. So we can simply put that straight down on top of our other brush, which is now sealing the level. You can change it back to the developer texture if you'd like, or even some of the optimization textures, which we'll get to. And now, Shift-A, changing the displacement tab, we can paint our geometry. Just get back quickly to something like we had when we first started creating it. Now if we right-click to bring it down, since we have our solid piece of geometry right on top, you'll notice that we'll actually put that, if you take a look in the side views, below our floor, which is sealing our level. So that actually will create a leak as well. We need to make sure that that is way up within our level. So the best thing for us to do here is going to be either lower our floor a couple units, drag down the walls so we continue to seal our level. And then create a surface of our displacement. Make sure our player entity isn't embedded into it. So we want him to be standing on top, not interfering with either displacement or obviously the other world geometry. So displacement, Shift A for the face edit sheet, and switch to displacement. Just paint a little more geometry. You can adjust your brush radius, get different effects. Now we have the option to kind of shrink our level a little bit, just being sure we're not going through into the void. Bring up some areas, etc. Okay, might help to Shift Z and kind of zoom in to see what you're up to. All right, close the paint geometry. We also have the option to paint alpha. And this is where those blended textures, this blend grass dirt that we applied comes in. Now, this material actually has two textures embedded, if you would, into it. It has a grass and a dirt texture. And what painting the alpha does is actually allow us to paint in or out influence of each of those materials. So you'll see I have this dirt texture, which I can, with my left and right mouse button, add spots of grass or sections of grass too. So maybe, you know, my kind of center of my map, center of my level, I want green grass, but the edges kind of slant upwards. I want to be this rock and any gradient in between. So you get really natural sloping textures, you know, little grass here, little dirt here, etc. And you can smooth those values out, just like you can smooth geometry, kind of adjusting the height values that you have as you go along.